The dress hung there like a white flag of surrender. Tomorrow was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, but as I stood in my childhood bedroom, something felt terribly wrong. My parents had been acting strange for weeks, insisting on this pre-wedding family dinner that had somehow turned into drinks that tasted off, followed by a heaviness in my limbs I couldn't explain. It wasn't until I woke up hours later, my head pounding, that I felt the breeze on my neck where my waist-length hair had been. They drugged me and cut it all off. "For your own good," Mom said, my once beautiful hair now in a choppy chin-length mess. No daughter of mine is walking down the aisle looking like a hippie. I spent the night crying, but as the sun rose on my wedding day, something inside me hardened. They'd taken my hair, but they wouldn't take my day. And they had no idea what I was about to do, what secrets I'd been keeping about them that would turn their perfect family image upside down by the time I said, "I do." Growing up in suburban Connecticut, our family looked picture perfect from the outside. My father, Richard, was a well-respected cardiothoracic surgeon at Hartford Memorial, and my mother, Eleanor, was the quintessential doctor's wife, president of 3 charity boards, and famous for her 4th of July parties that half the town attended. My younger brother, Alex, was the golden child, varsity quarterback, headed to Yale, just like Dad. And then there was me, Charlotte, always the odd one out. Mom had very specific ideas about how a surgeon's daughter should present herself. My natural curls were unruly, my laugh was too loud, and my interests were concerning. While other girls had Sweet 16 parties at country clubs, I spent mine being enrolled in an etiquette camp in Vermont after Mom found my sketchbooks filled with disturbing art. I wanted to study at RISD. They insisted on pre-med at their alma mater. "Remember the Henderson wedding?" my mother would often say to guests, laughing that tinkling laugh that never reached her eyes. "Charlotte showed up with purple streaks in her hair. Can you imagine? Dr. Henderson nearly had a stroke." What she never mentioned was how she'd locked me in my room for a week afterward, or how Dad had taken away my college fund until I died it back. The worst was my senior prom. I'd saved up for my secret waitressing job to buy a vintage emerald green dress that made me feel beautiful for once. When I came downstairs, Dad took one look and said, "You're not leaving this house looking like a streetwalker." Mom nodded in agreement. "We bought you the pink one from Nordstrom, sweetheart. That's what all the nice girls are wearing." When I refused to change, they called my date's parents and canceled, claiming I had come down with mono. I spent prom night locked in the bathroom, cutting off chunks of my hair in rebellion while Mom cried dramatically on the other side of the door about how I was breaking their hearts. But I got out. I went to State instead of Yale, paid my own way with scholarships and 3 jobs, and built a life in New York as an art therapist. I found my people, especially James, who loved my unruly hair and my loud laugh and my disturbing art. James, who proposed on the Brooklyn Bridge at sunrise with a vintage emerald ring that reminded me of that prom dress I never got to wear. The grand gesture was supposed to be me extending an olive branch. After years of minimal contact and obligatory holiday calls, I invited them to the wedding. Not just invited them, I asked Dad to walk me down the aisle. Mom cried real tears on the phone. "You're finally becoming the woman we raised you to be," she said, which should have been my first warning. What they didn't know was that I'd discovered their secret 8 months ago. It happened accidentally, when Aunt Meredith, Dad's estranged sister, who they'd always called mentally unstable, reached out after finding me on Instagram. "Has he told you about Caroline?" she asked over coffee in a quiet cafe. "Who's Caroline?" I'd replied. The color drained from her face. "Oh, Charlotte, there's so much they've kept from you." Caroline was my sister, my older sister who had died under mysterious circumstances when she was 19, before I was born. The sister whose existence had been completely erased from our family narrative. The sister whose death certificate listed accidental drowning, but whose autopsy report, which Aunt Meredith had kept all these years, told a different story. As I stood in my childhood bedroom the night before my wedding, touching my butchered hair and feeling the remnants of whatever they'd put in my drink, I realized that I was looking at my reflection in Caroline's mirror. I'd been sleeping in Caroline's room my entire life without knowing she had ever existed. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, the kind of crisp October New England day that wedding photographers dream about. I hadn't slept much after the hair incident. My eyes were puffy, and my head still felt fuzzy from whatever they had slipped into my drink. Mom burst into my room at 7 a.m. sharp, carrying a garment bag and a tray with her special hangover cure, raw eggs, Worcestershire sauce, and a splash of vodka. "Rise and shine, wedding girl," she chirped, as if drugging and assaulting me with scissors had never happened. "We have so much to do." "Mom, what the hell? My hair," I started, my voice breaking. "Looks absolutely darling," she interrupted, setting down the tray. "I've already called Monique at the salon. She's bringing a tiara that will look so much better with this elegant bob. Trust me, sweetheart, waist-length hair is so bohemian. This is sophisticated." She touched my choppy ends, and I flinched away. "You drugged me," I said flatly. "Don't be dramatic, Charlotte. It was just a little something to help you relax. You were getting cold feet, rambling about postponing. We couldn't have that." She unzipped the garment bag with a flourish. "Look what I've brought." Inside was not my dress, the one with the vintage lace bodice and flowing skirt that James and I had picked together. Instead, there hung a monstrosity of satin and pearls, high-necked and stiff. "This was my mother's dress," Mom said reverently, "and I wore it when I married your father. Now you'll continue the tradition." I felt something snap inside me. Where's my dress? That hippie rag. I donated it to Goodwill yesterday. This is so much more appropriate for a Harrington bride. The day spiraled from there. The bridesmaids arrived, my friends from New York looking increasingly concerned as the hours passed. Mom had rearranged the seating chart without telling me, moving James's artist friends to the back corner and showcasing Dad's medical colleagues at prime tables. She'd changed the flowers from wildflowers to tight white roses. The band had mysteriously been replaced by a string quartet. James called around noon, his voice tight with worry. "Char, are you okay? Your mom's not letting anyone see you." "They cut my hair," I whispered, locking myself in the bathroom. "They drugged me and cut off all my hair." Silence on the other end. Then, "What do you need me to do? We can postpone, we can elope. Just say the word." I looked at myself in the mirror, Caroline's mirror. I thought about her autopsy report, hidden in my suitcase. I thought about how she had tried to escape them too, back in 1985, with a boyfriend they didn't approve of and plans to move to California. "No," I said firmly. "The wedding happens today, but I need you to do something for me." By the time Dad came to escort me to the church, I'd managed to escape Mom's surveillance long enough to retrieve a few crucial items from my suitcase. I'd also sent a series of texts to Aunt Meredith, who was already at the church, despite not being on Mom's approved guest list. "You look," Dad trailed off, seeing me in Grandma's dress, my butchered hair arranged around the heavy tiara Mom had insisted on. "Beautiful? Appropriate? Finally acceptable?" I offered, my voice sweeter than the champagne being served. He cleared his throat. "Your mother is very happy." "I'm sure she is," I replied, tucking Caroline's silver locket, which Aunt Meredith had given me, inside the high neckline of the dress. "Everything's exactly how she wants it." The drive to the church was silent. I could feel the weight of the USB drive in my bouquet, secured with floral tape among the two tight roses. On it was everything Aunt Meredith had kept for 38 years. Caroline's autopsy report showing the bruises inconsistent with drowning, the police report that had been mysteriously amended after Dad made a large donation to the Police Benevolence Fund, photos of Caroline with her boyfriend Mark, her diary entries about their plans to leave, and, most damning, a letter she'd written the night before she died, detailing her fear of our parents. As we pulled up to the church, I saw James standing at the entrance, looking devastated at the sight of my hair. Behind him was Aunt Meredith, clutching her handbag nervously. "Ready to become Mrs. Reynolds?" Dad asked as he helped me from the car, his surgeon's hands firm on my arm. I smiled up at him, seeing for the first time the coldness behind his practiced bedside manner. "Your mother is very happy." "I'm sure she is," I replied, tucking Caroline's silver locket, which Aunt Meredith had given me, inside the high neckline of the dress. "Everything's exactly how she wants it." The drive to the church was silent. I could feel the weight of the USB drive in my bouquet, secured with floral tape among the two tight roses. On it was everything Aunt Meredith had kept for 38 years. Caroline's autopsy report, showing the bruises inconsistent with drowning. The police report that had been mysteriously amended after Dad made a large donation to the Police Benevolence Fund. Photos of Caroline with her boyfriend Mark, her diary entries about their plans to leave, and most damning, a letter she'd written the night before she died, detailing her fear of our parents. As we pulled up to the church, I saw James standing at the entrance, looking devastated at the sight of my hair. Behind him was Aunt Meredith, clutching her handbag nervously. "Ready to become Mrs. Reynolds?" Dad asked as he helped me from the car, his surgeon's hands firm on my arm. I smiled up at him, seeing for the first time the coldness behind his practiced bedside manner. I've never been more ready for anything in my life. The wedding march began as the massive oak doors of St. Thomas Episcopal swung open. 200 guests rose to their feet, and at the altar, James waited, his eyes never leaving mine. Mom sat in the front row, beaming with pride at the spectacle she'd orchestrated. Everything was perfect, exactly as she'd planned, except for what was about to happen. The walk down the aisle felt like moving through molasses. Each step brought me closer to the moment I'd been rehearsing in my mind. Dad's arm was rigid under my hand, his smile fixed for the crowd of Connecticut's finest, colleagues, country club members, and the social elite who'd watched me grow up while never really seeing me. When we reached the altar, Reverend Phillips asked, "Who gives this woman to be married?" "Her mother and I do," Dad replied, his voice carrying with the authority that had silenced hospital boards and family disagreements alike. But before he could take his seat beside Mom, I gripped his arm. "Actually," I said, loud enough for the first few rows to hear, "before we continue, there's something I'd like to say." Mom's smile faltered. I could see her frantically trying to signal me from the front pew. I turned to face our guests. James moved to stand beside me, his hand finding mine. "Thank you all for coming today," I began. "Many of you have known my family for years. You've attended my parents' 4th of July parties, donated to my mother's charities, and consulted my father for medical advice." I paused, feeling the weight of 200 pairs of eyes. But there's someone missing today. Someone who should be here. My sister, Caroline. A confused murmur swept through the church. Dad's face drained of color, and Mom stood up abruptly. "Charlotte, this isn't the time," Dad started. "It's exactly the time," I interrupted, my voice stronger now. "Caroline would be 47 today. She would have been married, maybe had children of her own, but none of you knew her because my parents erased her after she died. They told everyone she was a troubled runaway. Then they moved to a new town where nobody asked questions." I pulled out Caroline's locket from beneath the high neckline of Grandma's dress. This belonged to my sister. The sister I only learned about 8 months ago. Mom was moving down the aisle now, her heels clicking furiously on the marble. "Charlotte is unwell," she announced to the congregation. "The wedding will need to be postponed." "I'm not unwell, Mom. I'm finally seeing clearly." I turned to the crowd again. "Last night, my parents drugged me and cut off my hair while I was unconscious because they didn't approve of how I looked for my wedding. 38 years ago, they did something much worse to Caroline when she tried to leave home with her boyfriend." Dad lunged forward, but James stepped between us. From her seat, Aunt Meredith stood up, her voice ringing out. "It's all true. I have the documents." "And so do I," said, pulling the USB drive from my bouquet. I handed it to James, who passed it to his best man, a tech journalist whose integrity was unquestionable. On this drive is Caroline's autopsy report, showing injuries inconsistent with the accidental drowning on her death certificate. There are police reports that were amended after substantial donations from my father. And there's her final letter, written the night before she died. The church had erupted into shocked whispers. I could see Mom's charity board members exchanging horrified glances. Dad's chief of surgery was already on his phone, stepping out into the vestibule. "Charlotte Marie Harrington, you will stop this right now." Mom's voice had lost its society polish, revealing the steel underneath. From the back of the church, a man stood up, gray-haired but still handsome. "I'm Mark Reynolds," he said, his voice steady. "I was with Caroline the night before she died. She called me, terrified, said her parents had found out about our plans to move to California. I was supposed to pick her up the next morning, but she never showed." Dad's face contorted with rage. "You have no right." "I have every right," Mark continued. "I've waited 38 years to say this publicly. The police questioned me for weeks, but suddenly stopped when the ruling changed to accidental drowning. I've carried the truth all this time, along with the last letter she wrote to me." I turned to face my parents directly. "I've given copies of everything to the Hartford County District Attorney. They'll be reopening Caroline's case on Monday." Mom's face had gone from angry red to ashen gray. Dad looked like he might collapse. "Now," I said, turning back to James and Reverend Phillips, "I'd still like to get married today, but not in this dress, not with this hair, and certainly not with my parents' blessing." I stepped away from the altar, away from my stunned parents. James followed, and together we walked back down the aisle, past the shocked faces and buzzing whispers. Behind us, I could hear Mom wailing dramatically, while Dad tried to regain control of the situation, his surgeon's voice ordering people to remain calm. In the vestibule, my bridesmaids were waiting with my original wedding dress, rescued from the Goodwill donation center that morning. Aunt Meredith handed me an envelope containing old photos of Caroline. I looked just like her, right down to the curly hair my mother had always hated. As we prepared to reconfigure the wedding in the garden behind the church, I could hear the chaos erupting inside. The catharsis was dizzying. For the first time in my life, I had spoken my truth, Caroline's truth, and the carefully constructed Harrington family facade was crumbling at last. The wedding did happen that day, just not as anyone had planned. We moved everything to the garden behind the church, an autumn wonderland of gold and crimson leaves. My bridesmaids worked miracles with baby's breath and wildflowers from a nearby field, creating a makeshift crown that softened my chopped hair. James's artist friends, freed from their banishment to the back tables, transformed the church's garden into an impromptu bohemian paradise with borrowed fabric and string lights. About half the guests left with my parents, the country club contingent, the hospital board members, the society matrons who couldn't bear the scandal. But the ones who stayed, James's family, my college friends, even some of Dad's younger colleagues, they created something authentic and beautiful from the wreckage.
Reverend Phillips, visibly shaken but determined, performed the ceremony under an old oak tree. As I walked toward James in my rescued dress, a bit wrinkled but wholly mine, Mark, Caroline's Mark, stopped me. "You look just like her," he said quietly. "She would have been so proud of you today." The reception was held at the local craft brewery instead of the country club. There was pizza instead of salmon or chicken, and a friend's band replaced the string quartet. As James and I shared our first dance, I caught sight of Aunt Meredith talking intently with Detective Sarah Nguyen, who had arrived discreetly during the ceremony. "Your parents left for the Vineyard House," Aunt Meredith told me later, sipping champagne from a plastic cup, "but they won't get far. Sarah says they've already put a hold on their passports." The next morning, as James and I prepared to leave for our mini honeymoon in the Berkshires, the story broke. The Hartford Courant's headline was restrained. "Prominent surgeon and wife questioned in decades-old case." The New York tabloids were less subtle. "Wedding day bombshell. Bride accuses parents of killing sister." My phone exploded with calls and texts. Old classmates suddenly remembered how strange my parents had always been. Hospital staff shared stories of Dad's controlling behavior. 3 former nannies came forward with accounts of being fired after questioning my parents' disciplinary methods. The most surprising call came from my brother Alex. "I always knew something was off," he said, his voice hollow. "They had all these weird rules about the pool, about not asking questions about the time before I was born. When I found an old photo in Dad's study once, must have been Caroline, Mom told me it was a cousin who died and took the picture away." He paused. "I'm sorry I wasn't braver, Char. I'm sorry I didn't protect you." "You were a kid too," I reminded him. The investigation moved quickly. The new district attorney, eager to make her mark, assigned a cold case team. They drained the lake at our old summer house in the Berkshires, where Caroline had supposedly drowned. They didn't find anything there, but the renewed attention led to the discovery of love letters Caroline had hidden in the boathouse. Letters Mark never knew existed, letters that detailed her fear of our parents and her plans to escape. 3 weeks after the wedding, Dad's former groundskeeper came forward. He'd been paid to keep quiet all these years, but his conscience finally won out. He described seeing my parents bringing Caroline's body from the house to their car the night she died. The night she died, the official cause of death was changed from drowning to blunt force trauma. My parents were arrested at their Martha's Vineyard home. The perfect Harrington image shattered forever. The case became a media sensation. The respected doctor, the charity maven, the decades-old perfect crime. Mom broke first, claiming Dad had pushed Caroline during an argument about her inappropriate relationship with Mark. Dad's lawyers countered that Mom had been the one to strike Caroline with a heavy crystal vase when she announced she was leaving for California. Through it all, James and I retreated to our Brooklyn apartment, declining interview requests and speaking only through a statement crafted by a victims' rights attorney. I returned to my art therapy practice, finding healing in helping others process their trauma. I started painting again, creating a series called Caroline that would later be exhibited in a small but prestigious Soho gallery. 6 months after my wedding day, I received a package from the evidence room of the Hartford Police Department. Inside was Caroline's journal, released after prosecutors finished building their case. Reading my sister's words, her dreams of California, her love for Mark, her fear of our parents, I felt a connection that transcended time. On the last page she'd written, "Maybe someday I'll have a daughter, and I'll raise her to be free." Mark came to visit that spring, bringing old photographs and stories about Caroline. She loved art too, he told me. She was going to study at Berkeley while I did my PhD. We had it all planned out. He'd gone on to become a professor of literature, married and divorced, with 2 grown daughters who bore a striking resemblance to the aunt they'd never known. "Would you like to meet them?" he asked. "They've always known about Caroline, and now they'd like to know you."
my family expanded in unexpected ways. Aunt Meredith became a regular visitor. Alex left his corporate law practice to work for the Innocence Project. James's warm, chaotic family embraced me completely, showing me what unconditional love looked like. And in a strange twist of fate, some of my parents' former friends, the ones who'd stayed at the wedding, became supporters and allies. The grand gesture I'd planned, inviting my parents to my wedding, had transformed into something I never could have imagined: the liberation of truth. Caroline's story was finally told. She was no longer erased, no longer forgotten. My parents' trial began a year after my wedding. I testified for 2 days, telling the court about the controlling behavior, the manipulation, the night they drugged me and cut my hair. Their attorneys tried to paint me as unstable, resentful, making up stories for attention, but the physical evidence was overwhelming. On the last day of the trial, I wore my hair in its natural curls, grown out just enough to show their spring and life, and a silver locket containing a small photo of Caroline. As the jury delivered their verdict, guilty on all counts, I felt not triumph, but a profound sense of peace. Caroline had finally received justice. There was an unexpected twist waiting for me after the trial. As we sorted through my parents' estate, they'd received lengthy sentences that ensured they would spend the rest of their lives in prison. Alex discovered a hidden safe in Dad's study. Inside were adoption papers. I wasn't their biological child. I'd been adopted as an infant, just months after Caroline's death. "Do you think they were trying to replace her?" Alex asked as we sat among the scattered papers. "No," I said, studying my birth certificate. "I think they were trying to replace who they were. New child, new town, new story." I decided to search for my birth mother. The records led me to a woman named Diane living in Oregon who'd given up her baby daughter in 1986. Our reunion was bittersweet. She'd been just 18, pressured by her parents, haunted by the decision for decades. In her face, I saw echoes of my own. "I named you Emily," she told me over coffee at our first meeting, "after my grandmother." The name felt foreign, yet somehow right. Not a replacement for Charlotte, but an addition, another piece of my story recovered. Emily Charlotte Reynolds, I tried out loud. I like the sound of that. 2 years have passed since that October day when the truth finally broke free. I stand now in my art studio, surrounded by the Caroline series that launched my career as an artist alongside my therapy practice. My hair has grown out, wild and curly past my shoulders, exactly as it was meant to be. Last month, James and I welcomed our daughter into the world. We named her Caroline Emily Reynolds, a name that honors both the aunt who never got to live her truth and the name my birth mother gave me. When I look at her tiny face, I see the future instead of the past. A future where she will grow up knowing she is loved exactly as she is. My family looks nothing like I imagined growing up. Mark and his daughters visit regularly. Diane, my birth mother, moved east to be closer to us. Alex brings his new boyfriend for Sunday dinners. Aunt Meredith has become the grandmother figure Caroline Emily will grow up knowing. We're messy and imperfect, but real in a way the Harrington household never was. Sometimes people ask if I regret what happened at my wedding, the public confrontation, the media frenzy that followed. I tell them that freedom always comes at a cost, but living a lie costs even more. The truth may not always set you free immediately, but it opens the door to possibility. I've learned that family isn't always who raises you. Sometimes it's who sees you, truly sees you, and loves what they see. Sometimes it's who you find along the way, and sometimes it's a sister you never met, whose courage echoes through time to give you the strength to stand up and say, "Enough." If you're watching this and living in fear, if you're hiding your true self to make others comfortable, if you're carrying secrets that weigh you down, know that you deserve better. Your story matters. Your truth matters. And there are people waiting to love you for exactly who you are.
If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to this channel for more stories of transformation and truth. Your comments and support help others know they're not alone. Remember, it's never too late to rewrite your ending.